Before Jeffrey Epstein's lifeline snapped in a cold prison cell, he left behind a mysterious list. The 7 names that Jeffrey Epstein disliked the most. Not victims, not strangers. Those were powerful, familiar names in the world of finance, politics, and entertainment. People who had shaken hands with Epstein then turned their backs, betrayed him, or threatened to destroy everything he had built. And now the 7 names began to emerge. Especially the last name was the biggest enemy, completely destroying Jeffrey Epstein. Donald Trump, from close friend to traitor. In the 1990s, Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump were 2 powerful names in the world of high society. They were often seen together at lavish parties in New York and Florida. It was there that money-strong alcohol and young models formed the common flavor of the elite of that era. I know Jeffrey very well. He's a great guy. He's a great guy. He's a lot of fun. And to be honest, he likes younger women. Like I do, Donald Trump shared in 2002. The statement not only exposed Trump's closeness to Epstein, but also revealed a dangerous synchronicity between 2 men who loved control, manipulation, and the fascination with what they couldn't have. However, 2004 marked a turning point in the relationship. When a lavish Palm Beach mansion worth $40 million came up for sale, both Trump and Epstein entered a race to own it. Trump won the deal by offering a higher price, and he quickly sold the house for a huge profit. Epstein soon became secretly hostile, and Trump, with his pragmatic and arrogant nature, saw this as an act of transgression. The climax of the conflict was when Trump banned Epstein from the Mar-a-Lago club, where Epstein was a regular. The Daily Beast shared that according to several employees, the ban was issued after Epstein was accused of flirting with a female employee at the resort. This was an act that Trump, for legal or image reasons, could not tolerate. After the incident, Donald Trump kept his distance from Epstein. During the 2016 presidential campaign, and especially after Epstein's controversial death in 2019, Trump often avoided any questions about his former relationship. He claimed he didn't know Epstein, a typical response for politicians when faced with the risk of public opinion. However, the public did not forget easily. Photos of them together at Mar-a-Lago, a 1992 video of them dancing with young girls. And the relationship with figures like Ghislaine Maxwell continued to be exploited by investigators and the press. The relationship between Trump and Epstein was not simply 2 old acquaintances who partied together. It was a game between 2 predators, each pursuing power in a different way. Epstein manipulated money and other people's secrets. Trump manipulated the image media and political ambition. So when the conflict broke out, it was not just a normal argument, but a fight for survival. Whoever lost control in public was the loser. Trump chose to cut off and wash his hands clean, a politically astute move, but one that also left unanswered questions. Did he know more than he let on? The next name that once stunned the whole of England because of his brave argument with Jeffrey Epstein. Sarah Ferguson, when the Duchess called the devil. In 2011, as the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace became tense over the scandal surrounding Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein, a brave voice suddenly rose from within the royal family. Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, better known as Fergie. Without beating around the bush or using royal diplomacy, she publicly used harsh language to criticize Epstein. She called out his crimes by name in front of millions of viewers. She exposed him without mercy. It was a statement that stunned the whole of Britain, not because it was untrue, but because it came from the House of Windsor, a royal family known for its privacy, its clean and sanitized image. For Jeffrey Epstein, this was more than a slap in the face. Ferguson was neither a journalist nor a victim, but a duchess. She had a close relationship with Prince Andrew, whom Epstein considered a political ally and royal connection. Immediately after that statement, according to investigative articles from Vanity Fair, Epstein was really angry. He considered suing Sarah Ferguson for defamation and began pushing for legal action through his team of lawyers in the US and UK. Although the lawsuit was not formally filed, the underlying tensions turned into a war of words and public pressure. The story became more complicated when it was discovered that Sarah Ferguson had received money from Epstein to pay off personal debts in 2010, just a year before her comments criticizing Jeffrey. She later admitted that this was the biggest mistake of my life and said that she was deeply ashamed to have accepted money from someone like Epstein through an intermediary such as Prince Andrew. I took the money without fully understanding who he was, and I deeply regret it. Sarah Ferguson. This apology, in fact, was not only to calm public opinion, but also a way to avoid a legal battle with a man known for being cruel and vengeful like Epstein. In Epstein's picture of power and manipulation, Sarah Ferguson was one of the few people to call the devil by his name while he was alive. That public blowback still left a big mark. It triggered a domino effect that plunged Prince Andrew into a media crisis that lasted for years. Sarah Ferguson's feud with Jeffrey Epstein didn't last long, but it was a milestone. She was the first woman in the royal family to speak out publicly, even at the cost of her own reputation. It was a clash between honor and darkness. Ferguson chose to stand on the side of light, even though the price was not cheap. The next name might surprise you: U.S. Department of Justice and FBI. When the law is shaken by someone no one dare touch. In 2008, Jeffrey Epstein escaped the clutches of the U.S. justice system in a deal so mysterious that it shocked the entire legal profession, and left an indelible stain on the U.S. Department of Justice (DOJ) and the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI). Jeffrey Epstein has been under investigation since 2005, with overwhelming evidence of his evil crimes, including testimony from more than 30 victims. It seemed he would face a severe federal sentence, but Alex Acosta, the federal prosecutor in Florida at the time, secretly signed a non-prosecution agreement with Epstein. Epstein was only charged with a state crime, serving 18 months in prison. But he was out most of the day working, and no one in his network was ever prosecuted. Worse, the FBI was not informed of the deal before it was signed, a serious violation of due process. The deal also included a no notification to victims clause, which violated the Federal Victims' Rights Act (CVRA). Post-release earthquake, Justice Department cracks from within. When the deal was made public in a 2018 Miami Herald investigation, public outrage erupted. Lawyers, activists, and even DOJ insiders were deeply dissatisfied with how the case was handled. Several current FBI and DOJ employees sent internal letters of protest demanding a reinvestigation and holding those who protected Epstein accountable. Then, Attorney General William Barr was forced to reorder the investigation in 2019. This led to Epstein's rearrest in New York in July and his subsequent death in prison. During his semi-freedom, Epstein continued to flout federal law. He traveled on private jets and hosted parties with politicians. He often boasted of his close relationships with many people in the Justice Department, and that he always knew how to avoid getting caught, according to a former employee who was quoted in New York Magazine. Epstein was even said to have had insiders leaking information about the investigation, a claim that later DOJ reports have not been able to completely disprove. "If I am ever accused again, it will be the media's fault, not the law's." The DOJ's 2024 internal investigation report concluded that the 2008 agreement was morally inappropriate and violated due process. Epstein enjoyed extraordinary privilege. However, there was no evidence of wrongdoing by prosecutors at the time, adding to the public outrage. Why did the DOJ and FBI systematically fail? Epstein was a master manipulator. He understood legal loopholes, knew how to trade information, and maintained a sophisticated diplomatic shield. Many in the legal system suspected that Epstein had financial and political secrets of many powerful people, making the DOJ reluctant to touch the beehive. The clash between Epstein and the DOJ-FBI was no ordinary conflict. It was a battle between an individual with extraordinary hidden power and arguably the most robust legal system in the world. And for more than a decade, the bad guys won. The next name was once Epstein's sidekick, but soon became his sworn enemy. Stephen Hoffenberg, the man who took the blame for the financial ghost Jeffrey Epstein. When the name Jeffrey Epstein began to flood the news with evil crimes, few people remembered that before becoming a serial predator, Epstein was a cold, secretive, untraceable financial fraudster, all thanks to Stephen Hoffenberg as a front. Stephen Hoffenberg, a notorious businessman in New York in the 1980s and early 1990s. He was the founder of Towers Financial Corporation, a financial company once valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. But behind that attractive investment facade was one of the largest Ponzi schemes in the United States, before Bernie Madoff, an organized fraud scheme covered with fancy numbers and promises of unrealistic profits. According to Hoffenberg's testimony and court records, Epstein joined Towers Financial as Hoffenberg's personal financial advisor, but his role was far from as simple as the headline suggested. He was the real architect. I was just the tool. Stephen Hoffenberg, Washington Post, 2016. Epstein designed the phony fundraising strategies, concealed the cash flow, and shaped the entire Ponzi scheme using highly sophisticated financial engineering. Hoffenberg said he placed his full trust in Epstein because Epstein demonstrated a deep knowledge of financial markets and an unparalleled ability to manipulate investor psychology. When the legal net tightens, one goes to jail, one quietly disappears. In 1995, Towers Financial collapsed. Stephen Hoffenberg was arrested and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, along with more than $460 million in restitution to thousands of victims. He admitted to his leading role in the Ponzi scheme, but Epstein's name was completely absent from the indictment. While Hoffenberg was behind bars, Epstein, who had worked closely with him, quietly withdrew from Wall Street. He began building a shadowy empire of connections with billionaires, politicians, and intellectuals around the world. For some, Epstein disappeared. For Hoffenberg, it was the ultimate betrayal. Turning back, Hoffenberg rises to reclaim justice and honor. After his release from prison, Hoffenberg returned to the spotlight with a single goal: to expose Jeffrey Epstein's role in the scam. He spoke publicly to the press, detailing how Epstein had designed the Ponzi scheme. In 2016, Hoffenberg filed a lawsuit against Epstein in a New York court, accusing him of misappropriating his assets, making him a scapegoat, and seeking damages for his reputation and financial losses. "I was put in prison because of his plan. I kept quiet for too long. Now I speak." Hoffenberg to the press, 2016. Although the case never fully went to trial, Hoffenberg's testimony created a major crack in the impeccable facade Epstein had tried to build for more than a decade. Why did Epstein escape, but Hoffenberg did not? Epstein was not legally named in Towers Financial. All the signing and decision-making power was taken by Hoffenberg, which allowed Epstein to wash his hands of any official involvement. Epstein was a master of anonymity, knowing when to back off and let others take the fall for him. Hoffenberg, infatuated with money and power, blindly entrusted everything to Epstein. And when disaster struck, Epstein cut him off completely, leaving Hoffenberg to sink alone. The outcome was tragic indeed. Stephen Hoffenberg died alone in 2022, after years of struggling to be recognized as both victim and perpetrator in a game he had no control over. Epstein, by contrast, whom Hoffenberg once called a monster without a trace, built a massive underground empire, only to be exposed more than 20 years later in a completely different scandal. Among criminals, the most dangerous person is not the shooter, but the one who stands behind it, plans it, and then disappears as if he never existed. Leon Black, Wall Street tycoon, bets on darkness. In the world of Wall Street investing, Leon Black is no ordinary name. He is the founder and CEO of Apollo Global Management. Black once controlled more than $400 billion in assets. He is a living monument of modern financial capitalism. But all that greatness began to falter when a notorious name came back to haunt him: Jeffrey Epstein. After his release from prison in 2009, Epstein was largely turned away from high society. But Leon Black not only maintained contact, he also paid Epstein an incredible $158 million between 2012 and 2017. Black explained that Epstein had advised him on an extremely complex tax strategy that saved him hundreds of millions of dollars. He insisted that all transactions were legal and unrelated to Epstein's personal conduct. But when the $158 million figure was leaked in investigations by the New York Times and the Financial Times, the financial industry was shocked. They questioned why Black chose Epstein, a convicted felon, over a team of lawyers or certified tax experts. Why was the payment so much larger than any other client Epstein had? Public opinion began to question the extent of Epstein's connection to Black. Investors put pressure on him, shareholder groups demanded transparency. Although he was not convicted, Leon Black was forced to resign as chairman of Apollo in early 2021, and also withdrew from the board of directors of many major cultural organizations, such as Metropolitan Museum of Art, Met Carnegie Council Black Family Foundation, family's private charity. "My relationship with Epstein was wrong," Black wrote in a letter to Apollo employees. "But I did not break the law. It was a financial calculation, and it cost me my career." Epstein's victims also sued Black, alleging that he turned a blind eye to Epstein's abuses, and may have even indirectly funded them through shady dealings. From a tax consulting client, Epstein gradually emerged as someone who relied on Black to maintain his network of influence with the tycoons. He used this connection to rebuild his image after the scandal. Leon Black did not serve any prison time. He was never convicted of a crime. But the Jeffrey Epstein stain was something he could not erase from his reputation, even for the rest of his life. The next one, like Leon Black, mistakenly gave his trust to a real monster. Les Wexner, the man who gave the key to the monster. For years, Jeffrey Epstein was known as a financier with no degrees, no asset management certifications, and no client records. Yet he lived lavishly, traveled by private jet, and knew tycoons and royalty. The question is, where did he get all that from? The answer has a name: Les Wexner. Les Wexner is the founder of L Brands, the corporation that owns famous brands such as Victoria's Secret Bath and Body Works, and was once an American fashion icon. In the late 1980s, Epstein, then a former high school teacher who had worked shadily at Bear Stearns, began approaching Wexner through his connections in Ohio and Manhattan. No one knows how, but within a few years, Epstein became Les Wexner's sole personal financial advisor. Not only that, Wexner also gave Epstein full legal authority to control assets, transfer real estate, and sign financial documents on his behalf. "I have never trusted anyone so much in my life," Les Wexner wrote in a private letter to Epstein in 1993. The $77 million mansion on East 71st Street, New York, one of the most expensive properties on the Upper East Side, was owned by Les Wexner, but it ended up being Jeffrey Epstein's official residence for many years. There was no public transfer, no sale price, no lease term. Wexner simply bequeathed the house to his friend to use. This was the unofficial headquarters of the Epstein empire, where a series of parties and VIP receptions took place. And according to many victims, this was one of the key locations in the series of gruesome crimes. After the Epstein case resurfaced in 2019, Wexner immediately denied any involvement, saying he had no knowledge of Epstein's criminal activities. However, under pressure from the public and the press, he was forced to admit that Epstein had misappropriated at least $46 million from him. Wexner ended his relationship with Epstein in 2007, the same time Epstein was first indicted. He felt betrayed and disgusted. "I deeply regret ever trusting someone like that." Les Wexner speaking to shareholders in 2019. But the apology came too late. Investigators found that Epstein used Wexner's fame to build a network of influence with wealthy figures from tech CEOs to Ivy League scholars. The Jeffrey is the financier to the Victoria's Secret owner invitation, opened doors for him even after he was released from prison. In 2020, several of Epstein's victims filed lawsuits against Les Wexner and his wife, claiming they knew or should have known about what was going on inside properties Epstein controlled. To date, however, Wexner has not been criminally charged, and the lawsuits are either settled or dismissed. Yet his reputation never fully recovered. His overconfidence, over-favoritism, and over-silence in the face of unusual signs left one wondering, did Wexner really not know? Or did he choose not to know? Finally, one brave woman has unmasked Jeffrey Epstein and completely destroyed the tycoon-turned-demon. Virginia Giuffre, the devil exposed. If Jeffrey Epstein built a dark empire where victims were erased, Virginia Giuffre was the first to break that silence despite years of threats, smears, and neglect. She is not just a victim, but a survivor, a witness, and a whistleblower. From Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell to Prince Andrew. Start in the dark. In 2000, Virginia was just 16 years old, working at the spa at the Mar-a-Lago Resort in Florida, a favorite of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. There she was approached by Ghislaine, who promised her a job as a professional massage assistant for a prominent financier. But that job quickly turned into a nightmare. Epstein, with Ghislaine's help, seduced and coerced Virginia, then traded her as a living commodity to many other famous and powerful figures under the guise of luxury parties and business trips. She was flown to London, New York, the private island of Little St. James. She was always with Epstein, not by choice, but because she had no way out. Breaking the silence. The lawsuit that changed history. In 2015, Virginia Giuffre then married Virginia Roberts. Giuffre filed a lawsuit against Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. But she didn't stop there. She also named Prince Andrew, accusing him of assaulting her at least 3 times. "I was forced to smile, forced to obey. But I will never forget the look in her eyes, the smell of her perfume, or the fear that night Virginia Giuffre testified in court. The world was stunned. The British royal family was shocked. And what was more horrifying, Virginia not only told the story, but also had photographs, witnesses, and diaries to record every piece of the puzzle. Epstein shakes, Maxwell exposed, Andrew collapses. After Virginia went public, everything fell like a domino effect. Epstein was recaptured in 2019 and died in prison under controversial circumstances. Ghislaine Maxwell went on the run, was captured by the FBI, and was sentenced to 20 years in prison for human trafficking. Prince Andrew was stripped of all his military titles and royal honors. He was forced to settle out of court with Virginia in 2022, paying more than $12 million. Although he did not admit guilt, it was an irreparable humiliation. Virginia becomes Epstein's most feared enemy. While many victims were intimidated or silenced by money and power, Virginia did not stop despite being smeared, ridiculed, and isolated. She collected documents, recordings, witness statements, and repeatedly asked the court to reopen sealed records. She fought not just a criminal, but a system of oppression, shielded by lawyers, politicians, and royalty. Virginia Giuffre doesn't need an army. She doesn't need a title. She doesn't need power. All she has are the memories of a broken girl and her insatiable desire for justice. And that's what pulled down Jeffrey Epstein's mask, dragging down Maxwell Andrew and many others who have never been named. The death of Jeffrey Epstein. Truth, murder, or setup? On August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center (MCC) in New York. The authorities have classified the death as a self-inflicted gunshot wound that occurred while he was in custody and was caused by an object commonly found in a jail cell. But in a case that involved power, a global roster of characters, and a mastermind who never faced justice, it was an unusual death. It came too quickly, just as he was about to go to trial, just as records regarding VIPs were being released to the public. And in a high-level federal prison, such a mistake should not have happened. Even more frightening, creepy coincidences occurred within 48 hours of Epstein's death. Both cameras facing Epstein's cell accidentally failed, recording nothing throughout the night. The hard drive containing the backup lost data during processing. 2 guards in charge of the prison said they fell asleep for more than 3 hours and failed to perform the required 30-minute check. Both were later criminally investigated for falsifying prison inspection records. Epstein's cellmate was moved for unknown reasons on the night of August 9th, leaving Epstein alone in his cell despite his suicide attempt 2 weeks earlier. Renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden, who examined the cases of Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy, disagreed with the government's conclusion. The marks on Epstein's neck were more consistent with manual strangulation than hanging, Dr. Baden told Fox News in 2019. Epstein carried with him thousands of secrets that could sink the entire global political, financial, and artistic system. Names mentioned in the dossier or indirectly linked include Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, and a series of technology CEOs, Ivy League professors, and even former CIA officials. If Epstein had gone to trial, his evidence and testimony would have been explosives for justice. But with his death, the entire trial process was no longer forced to continue as a private prosecution. His clients, his co-defendants, his financiers, his protectors all were freed from the witness box. Too many people would have been implicated if Epstein had lived. The cameras dying, the guards sleeping, the inmates disappearing were all scripted. His death, rather than closing the case, became the key to opening the biggest investigation into the greed, power, and corruption of the modern elite. If you think Epstein simply killed himself, you don't really understand what he knew. A comment in New York Magazine, 2020. What do you think about the devil disguised as tycoon Jeffrey Epstein? Comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to hear the best stories about your favorite celebrities.